it and at what cost? Chris Mason, BBC News in Washington.
Michael Bociurkiw is a global affairs analyst and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Centre, and he joins us now from Odessa. Michael, thank you very much for joining us here on BBC News. So no public statement of a change in approach. How likely is it, do you believe, that eventually Ukraine will get permission?
Sure, I believe it will happen. It'll take some time. The British Prime Minister still needs to discuss further with European allies. I believe he's going to Rome after the Washington visit to consult with Prime Minister Maloney. But, you know, this is very typical of what's been happening since the start of the war. The Americans have been dragging their feet. The Europeans, the British take the lead, and eventually the Americans do act upon what is requested. But look, there should be no argument about the usefulness of these missiles for Ukraine. They need to have the ability to strike deeper inside Russia at the launch pads where the missiles come into Ukraine almost on a daily basis, because it isn't enough to have air defense systems to protect Ukraine. Ukraine needs the ability to strike at the source of the Russian missiles.
The United States and the UK won't be naive to that fact, so why delay?
I think there is institutional resistance in the White House and the State Department to this idea of giving Ukraine the opportunity, the ability to strike inside Russia. I think also, you know, they're succumbing to Putin's bluffing that he will use nuclear weapons. Few of us in my circle believe he will. Of course, he could do something careless. They do have the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, for instance. They could use that to, for example, trigger some type of accident, and that could cause a lot of damage, not only to the Ukrainians, but to everybody. So they're, again, succumbing to Putin threats that I don't think he'll follow through on.
Obviously, we've got the American presidential election in a couple of months' time. How different might the approach to Ukraine be if Donald Trump were to be re-elected?
Well, I think that's the rush on the part of the British Prime Minister and others to push the U.S. to approve this. It's kind of future-proofing Ukraine if a Trump presidency gets in. And, you know, it's hard to believe, but we got a hint of what the Trump plan would be for Ukraine. These are basically Kremlin talking points of a demilitarized zone, of allowing Russia to keep what it's taken from Ukraine, of a peacekeeping force that is very ill-defined. So it doesn't look good for Ukraine. I think Mr. Trump will follow through on his threat, or his promise, rather, to make a deal with Mr. Putin in the first few hours of his presidency, if not before. And that definitely will not be in Ukraine's favor.
Michael Bociurkiw from the Atlantic Council, thank you for your time.
Pleasure.